This means caregivers are not needed anymore. Leave because I'm going to live with her.
This was what my husband, who had returned home drunk as usual, said. Until now, he had pushed the care of his parents on me and didn't care about the family. Seeing him acting so selfishly, I was left speechless. What's more, I was half forcibly driven out of the house. As I stood there in bewilderment, holding my son's hand, my son tearfully said to me, "Mom, it's going to be okay. I'll take care of that guy." 15 years later, my son smiled at me.
Mom, I kept my promise.
As a result of my son keeping his promise to me, my ex-husband ended up in a terrible situation. My name is Violet. I'm a 36-year-old office worker. I live with my husband, Dean, and son, Trevor. Dean and I were college classmates, and we became close after attending the same seminar. We continued our relationship after graduating from college, and got married a few years later. As a couple, we have been together since our college days, so there's no longer excitement or the feeling of butterflies in stomachs. However, I felt a sense of comfort in being able to maintain a friendship-like relationship indefinitely. I got pregnant shortly after getting married and gave birth to our son, Trevor. Both Dean and I were completely smitten with our son. Furthermore, Dean suggested,
"Let's buy a bigger house for our growing family."
And so we bought the house. I felt an almost frightening level of happiness, like something out of a movie. I wish this happiness could last forever. However, this happy life would gradually begin to crumble. One day, Dean suddenly said,
"I need to take care of my parents, so they will be living with us."
I was shocked by the suddenness of this. "Even if you say that suddenly, are your parents okay with it?" That's all I could say. However, Dean simply replied,
"I've already made up my mind,"
and started watching TV. He had always been a bit domineering from the beginning of our relationship. Once he decided something, he wouldn't listen to anyone, so he would proceed with the discussion about living together on his own. I felt that arguing any further would be pointless, so I reluctantly accepted the idea of living together. Fortunately, both of my in-laws were good people and treated Trevor kindly. My mother-in-law even apologized to me, saying, "I'm sorry for the abrupt decision. I even considered a senior care facility, but Dean insisted on taking care of us at our house because it's his childhood home." I still think it was Dean's own decision. But even when we started living with his in-laws, Dean didn't help with caregiving.
"Caring for her husband's parents is the wife's job."
That was his argument. Things started feeling a bit strange since he unilaterally decided on living with his parents. Despite being somewhat domineering, he had generally been kind, but gradually his words and attitudes towards me became colder.
"Hey, hasn't my shirt been ironed yet? Make sure you do it by tomorrow. Last night's dinner, the meat was too scarce. You should know my taste better."
He started to complain about various small things that he had never mentioned before, one after another. His change in attitude wasn't limited to just me. He became colder towards Trevor, whom he had adored. In the past, when Trevor returned from school,
"Did something fun happen at school?"
I used to listen to him, asking questions like that. However, when Trevor tried to speak to him, "Dad, something happened at school today," Dean would respond,
"Shut up. I'm watching soccer now. Don't bother me,"
he said coldly. As such things continued, Trevor became completely withdrawn, no longer initiating conversations with Dean. I felt sorry for Trevor and made an effort to listen to my son's stories, no matter how busy I was. However, I also had a job to attend to. Balancing work, house chores, child rearing, and caregiving was quite challenging. Naturally, I couldn't provide care for my in-laws while at work, so there were days when I had to rely on a caregiver during my working hours. On the days when the caregiver didn't come, I rushed home during my work breaks to provide care for my in-laws. Afterward, I managed to handle all the household chores for everyone. Every day I was completely exhausted, And to be honest, I was quite drained. During this time, Dean started going out to drink more frequently, and he began to come home reeking of alcohol and perfume. If you have time to go out drinking so often, can't you help with the household chores? In response, my husband shouted angrily,
Shut up. Men have social obligations, you know.
You say it's a social obligation, but you didn't go out this often before, right? Besides, the decision to live with your parents was something you decided on your own, so shouldn't you cooperate a little?
I've been saying it for a while. Housework, childcare, and taking care of my parents are the wife's responsibilities.
At this rate, the argument between Dean and I was unbearable. There's nothing more harmful to a child than seeing their parents argue. I tried to express my opinions to Dean when Trevor was asleep, and I avoided complaining about him in front of our son. However, Trevor was already 10 years old. He must have sensed various things. One day, Trevor said these kind words to me. Mom, are you okay? You seem a little down lately. Is it hard to take care of Grandma and Grandpa? If there's anything I can do to help, I'll help too, okay? Trevor's words almost brought me tears, but I couldn't show my weakness. Thank you, Trevor. You're so kind, but don't worry about me. Was school fun today? I tried to keep the conversation light, so as not to burden my son. For Trevor's sake, and for my own, I had to stay strong. I reminded myself of this every day. Meanwhile, Dean's behavior took a turn for the worse. He began going to drinking parties more frequently, sometimes not coming home for days. He even stopped contributing to the household finances. I had reached my breaking point. Something had to change. Just as I was contemplating this, my in-laws' health deteriorated, and they passed away one after another. It was as if my father-in-law was chasing after my late mother-in-law. Caring for them had been challenging, but losing my kind in-laws filled Trevor and me with sadness. Even in times like these, Dean continued to go out drinking, and didn't even help prepare for the funerals. I reluctantly took charge of the funeral preparations. Things finally came to an end, and one day while I was at home resting, the kind-hearted Trevor approached me.
Mom, you've worked so hard,
he said, patting my shoulder. At that moment, Dean returned home, and he seemed drunk again. I had a bad feeling about this. Trevor, go to your room. I told him to stay in his room. Dean stood in front of me and abruptly said,
Now, we don't need any more caregivers. The only reason I haven't divorced you until now is because I needed someone to care for them.
Huh? What do you mean by don't need?
Exactly what it sounds like. I'm going to live here with my new girlfriend, and we'll get married soon. You both need to leave.
What is this all of a sudden? Do you even know what you're talking about? I was in disbelief. Dean had always been selfish, and I couldn't contain my anger at his words. However, Dean continued without regard for my feelings.
I don't love you guys anymore. Besides, my new girlfriend is pregnant. I'm going to build a happy home with my new family. I have no choice, so I'll pay you some alimony.
And just like that, I was forcefully kicked out of the house. Trevor, who had heard the commotion, rushed after me. Dean threw my bag and belongings out of the house and said,
Goodbye.
With a single word, he closed the door. In the end, I had no choice but to leave the house with Trevor. Holding my son's hand, I was at a loss for what to do next. I had a job, but my parents lived far away, and I couldn't rely on them. Above all, I was anxious about whether I could support Trevor on my own. Trevor, tears streaming down his face, said, Mom, I've got your back. I'm going to make that guy pay for what he did to me right now. I hugged Trevor, and we both cried by the roadside. At that time, I couldn't have imagined that Trevor would turn those words into reality. Since leaving home with Trevor, I had been working hard to raise him. I had a full-time job, but being a single mother wasn't easy. I was determined not to burden Trevor with my struggles. Fortunately, Trevor grew up to be a kind and upright young man.
Mom, I made curry today.
Really? You made it all by yourself? Were you okay?
Yeah, I was careful with handling the stove.
Thank you, Trevor. My son helped with household chores to ease my busy schedule. Trevor, I know you're busy with your studies, so you don't have to overexert yourself.
I'm okay. I pay attention in class and try to finish my homework during lunch breaks.
Thus, Trevor and I spent our days helping one another and cooperating with each other. Time flew by and Trevor successfully entered university, graduated, and started his career.
I'm planning to work as an employee for just 1 year to gain experience, and then I'll start my own business.
He was enthusiastic about it, and indeed, 1 year later, he fulfilled his words and established his company. It was remarkable that the once small Trevor had become the president of a company. I was proud of myself at the same time and relieved that my work as a mother was over. Even after becoming a company president, my son continued to live with me. Trevor, you might find a girlfriend soon and want to move out. It's okay, you know. I told him this, but he responded with reassuring words.
Not right now. I'm still here by your side, so don't worry.
Trevor remained the same as when he was a child, always saying kind words to me. We were living peacefully together until one day.
Mom, I have something to tell you,
he said to me. I wondered if he had a girlfriend and was going to announce his engagement. However, what Trevor had to say was unexpected.
Mom, it took me a little longer, but I finally got back at him.
Huh? I had no idea what he was talking about. Got back at him? What do you mean? Then Trevor explained.
I got back at that awful man who tormented you.
At that moment, the face of a man came to my mind, and it was the face of my ex-husband, Dean. That man? You mean your father? What do you mean by got back at him? Trevor slowly began to tell me the story. Trevor had just recently started his own company, and thankfully the business was doing really well, experiencing rapid growth. During this time, he coincidentally received a business proposal from my ex-husband's company. It was true that Trevor had established a company similar to Dean's. For the business negotiations, Trevor asked Dean to participate along with some of the company's supervisory staff. Several of the supervisory staff had confused expressions, but it seemed that they included Dean at the request of the client company's president, who had a strong preference for it. Dean, who was somewhat oblivious, was initially pleased because he had heard about the positive feedback on his sales performance. However, when he saw Trevor's face during the business negotiation, he reportedly turned pale rapidly. He knew that his son had the same name, but he never imagined that the son he abandoned 15 years ago would become the president of the company he was dealing with. Even during the discussion, Dean couldn't stop sweating. The compliance officers repeatedly warned him, saying,
"What's wrong with you? Pay attention."
However, Trevor didn't mention Dean for any length of time. Dean was clearly relieved, apparently. Finally, Trevor had this to say.
"Now, I'll ask you one last question. Is it correct that your company tolerates infidelity between employees?"
At that moment, the room fell silent. The supervisory officers looked baffled, and Dean began to sweat once again. He couldn't help but say,
"Let's stop talking about matters unrelated to the business,"
he shouted. And this surprised the supervisory officers, who asked in response,
"What? What's the matter with you all of a sudden? And what's this talk about, Mr. President? In our company, such actions are strictly prohibited. We absolutely do not tolerate such behavior."
Then Trevor looked at Dean.
"But what about Mr. Turner over there?"
It seems like the supervisory officers were confused, and the director asked,
"And? What about him?" "Mr. Turner is my biological father. During my childhood, he had an affair with another woman, which led to him kicking my mother and me out of the house. He never paid a cent in child support or alimony."
Then Dean banged his desk and got up.
"Mr. President, there are certain things you can and can't say. I'll sue you for defamation without any evidence, you know."
However, Trevor remained calm and ignored his outburst.
"You've married your mistress and had children, haven't you? And now you're having an affair with one of your company's secretaries, aren't you?"
With that, Trevor laid out the photographic evidence on his desk. Upon seeing these photos, the supervisory officers turned pale.
What are you doing?"
They all glared at Dean, and they began to apologize profusely.
"I'm sorry. We will take appropriate action on this matter. So can we please consider it separate from our business negotiations?"
Thus, the meeting was temporarily adjourned. Dean was led away by the supervisory officers, but before he left, he shouted at Trevor.
"Trevor, I'm your father. Do you think it's okay to do this?"
He kept shouting until the end, it seems. After hearing from my son, I was in a state of shock. I couldn't believe something like that had happened. So I voiced the question that was on my mind. "But why did you know that your father was cheating or not paying child support or alimony? And I never told you about the affair. I even lied about how much money I received from your father to make sure you didn't feel unloved. I never talked about your father's terrible behavior. You might have had a hunch, but I made sure not to discuss such things with you."
"Well, I was about 10 years old back then, so I somehow understood it. Plus, I happened to find your old diary."
"Huh? Diary?"
"Yeah, and it had this written in it. I have proof of the affair, but I don't want to cause Trevor any more grief. I decided to forget about it."
In fact, at the time, I had evidence that Dean was having an affair. I could have demanded compensation from the woman he had an affair with. However, I only wanted to think about the future with Trevor. I didn't want to become a vengeful person, demanding compensation from the other woman, or pressuring Dean for child support, showing that side to Trevor. So I chose to give up on all of those claims. I was in disbelief that Trevor knew about those things. To which Trevor continued, "It took time to get back at that man, but now it's okay. I put him through hell instead of you doing it, Mom. You might not have wished for revenge, but I couldn't forgive him." I burst into tears at the thought of Trevor. "Thank you, Trevor." Having said that, I held my son's hand. Afterward, it seems that Dean received a demotion and was transferred to a rural area as a result of this incident. The rumors of his affair with the secretary were known even in his new post, and it seems he felt uncomfortable there. Furthermore, his current wife discovered the affair, leading to a divorce and demands for alimony. Now he is working alone in an unfamiliar place, struggling to pay alimony. It appears that even the secretary, his affair partner, left the company promptly, showing that she might not have been genuinely serious about him. On the other hand, Trevor and I continued to enjoy peaceful days together. After hearing about Dean's downfall, his name was never brought up between Trevor and me. I had put that man behind me and looked forward to enjoying life with Trevor from now on.